The palace stood tall, but its walls carried marks of war. Smoke rose from the far edges of the city, and the sound of iron boots still echoed in the streets. The kingdom had survived another battle, yet the air was heavy with grief. Queen Eleanor stood near the balcony of her chamber, looking down at the soldiers returning from the battlefield. Her eyes searched their faces, but most were hidden under helmets and dirt. The war had taken too much already, and she feared how much more it would take before peace returned. Among the soldiers there was one who always drew her attention. His name was Daniel. He was not the loudest, nor the most decorated, but there was something different about him. He carried himself with calm strength, never boasting, never asking for reward. He wore a dark suit of armor that seemed heavier than what the others carried. Day after day, he marched with it, never removing even a single piece in public. The people had begun to whisper about him. Some said he wore it because of great scars. Others believed he was hiding a curse. But the queen felt there was something more behind his silence. Daniel returned from battle with steady steps, holding his sword low, his armor scratched and marked. He passed the other soldiers without words. Many of them respected him, though they did not understand him. He gave no speeches, but men followed him without question. His presence on the field was enough to make them stand their ground, even in the darkest hours. The queen turned from the balcony and walked back inside, but her mind stayed with the soldier. For weeks she had noticed him, but tonight his silence felt heavier than before. She asked her maid Claire to summon him to the hall later, but Daniel refused. He always refused. He preferred the shadows of the barracks, the silence of the night watch, and the company of his own thoughts. Later that evening, Eleanor walked through the palace halls, her steps slow and careful. She remembered the faces of men who had fallen, and the families who would never see them again. The war had stolen much from her people, and even from her own heart. Yet when she thought of Daniel, she felt both curious and unsettled. He was loyal, that she knew. He had saved lives, defended the gates, and never once abandoned his post. But why did he carry such a wall around himself? Why did he never let anyone see the man beneath the armor? In the camp outside the palace, Daniel sat alone near the fire. Other soldiers laughed, drank, and shared stories of survival. Daniel remained quiet, sharpening his blade with slow and steady strokes. The firelight showed the marks on his armor, scratches that told of battles fought too close, blows that should have ended him, but he endured. He always endured. Some younger soldiers looked at him with awe, but none dared ask why he kept his armor on, even in the safety of camp. The night deepened, and a soft wind carried the smell of smoke from distant fires. Daniel looked up at the stars for a moment, as if seeking something far away. His hand rested on the chest plate of his armor, as if it was both a shield and a prison. Memories haunted him, memories he would not share, pain, loss, betrayal, and a promise he had made long ago. He closed his eyes, but the images returned, reminding him why he could not remove the armor, why he could not let anyone see. Queen Eleanor stood once more at her balcony, her eyes searching the dark campfires below. She wondered what truth lay hidden beneath the steel. She wondered if Daniel was protecting himself, or if he was protecting others from the truth he carried. Her heart felt a strange pull, a need to understand the man who never let the world see his face. She whispered to herself, asking why she cared so deeply for a soldier she barely knew. The night passed in silence, but something had begun to change. The queen's heart was no longer at rest, and the soldier's burden grew heavier with every passing day. The war was not only fought on the field, it was also fought in the hearts of those who carried secrets, and in the silence between a queen and her soldier. The morning sun rose over the palace, but its light did little to wash away the weight of the war. Smoke still drifted in the distance, and the cries of the wounded echoed in the courtyards. Queen Eleanor walked through the halls, her gown brushing against the cold stone floor. She had not slept much. Her thoughts were still caught on the silent soldier who never removed his armor. Daniel's image stayed in her mind, the way he carried himself with strength, but never showed his true face. Later that day, she entered the council chamber. Visors spoke of strategies, maps, and the movement of enemy forces. Their words filled the room, but her mind wandered. She kept recalling the firelit image of Daniel sitting alone, sharpening his blade while the others laughed and shared stories. His silence was louder than the voices of her advisors. She wondered if a man who carried so much silence could also carry the key to something deeper, something the kingdom itself needed. When the meeting ended, she asked Claire to call Daniel once again. This time she was firm. The message carried her command, not just her request. Daniel arrived at the palace gates later in the evening. His armor was as dark as the night, scratched and worn, but still strong. He walked with steady steps, head bowed in respect but eyes unreadable beneath his helm. The queen greeted him in the great hall. Torches burned on the walls, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Daniel stood tall, his sword at his side, silent as always. Eleanor studied him closely, searching for some hint of the man beneath the armor. She spoke gently at first, asking about the soldiers, about the state of the men under his command. Daniel answered in short words, respectful but distant. He gave her reports of supplies, morale, and readiness, but nothing personal. His words were sharp and precise, like a blade honed too many times. Finally, Eleanor asked why he never removed his armor. Her voice carried no anger, only curiosity. Daniel paused. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unbroken. He shifted slightly, his gauntlets clinking, but he gave no answer. Instead, he lowered his head and said that his duty was to protect the kingdom, not to speak of himself. With that, he bowed and asked permission to return to his post. The queen let him go, but her heart was not at ease. That night, Eleanor stood again at her balcony, looking over the campfires below. The men celebrated a small victory, but Daniel sat alone watching the flames. She could see him even from afar. It was like a shadow among the light. She wondered what he hid, what pain kept him locked inside that suit of steel. In the camp, Daniel's thoughts were far from rest. He remembered the past, a battle years ago, when his own company was left behind in a valley of fire. The memory of screams still haunted him. He had survived, but many had not, and he carried their memory like a weight on his chest. His armor was not just protection, it was a promise. Promise never to let anyone see the scars of failure, the marks of battles that had broken him inside and out. The steel was his shield against the world, against questions, against pity. The next morning, the soldiers gathered for training in the yard. Daniel led them with precision, his commands clear and sharp. He taught them to hold the line, to fight with discipline, to never lose formation. The men respected him, though they feared his silence. Some whispered that he had no soul, that he was more steel than man. Yet when he fought, his movements showed skill and fire that no one could deny. Even the youngest recruits stood straighter in his presence. From the palace window, Eleanor watched again. She saw not just a soldier, but a man carrying a burden no one else understood. Her heart told her that beneath the armor was not just a warrior, but a wounded man. She felt a strange bond, though no words had been spoken between them beyond duty. As the sun set, Eleanor resolved that she would not stop until she learned the truth. Daniel could not remain a mystery forever. The kingdom needed him, but she felt she needed to know the man behind the armor even more. The war was far from over, and secrets could not remain hidden forever. The days passed slowly as the kingdom tried to recover from the battles. Repairs were made to the palace walls, and new recruits filled the training grounds. Yet even with signs of strength returning, Queen Eleanor felt the weight of unease. She still thought of Daniel, the silent soldier who never removed his armor. His presence was steady, like stone, but his silence had begun to trouble her more than ever. One evening, she called for him again. This time, she arranged for no advisors, no guards, only herself and Daniel in the royal garden. The moonlight lit the stone paths, and the sound of water trickling from the fountain filled the quiet air. When Daniel entered, his armor caught the silver glow of the moon. He bowed and waited for her words, saying nothing as always. Eleanor asked him to sit, and after a pause he obeyed, though he remained stiff and distant. She began speaking not of war but of life before the war. She spoke of the years when peace filled the land, of laughter in the courtyards and songs in the halls. Her voice softened as she remembered the days when her father ruled, and she was only a girl chasing dreams across the gardens. She told him she missed those days, and feared they would never return. Daniel listened. Though he said little, she could see in the tilt of his head and the stillness of his hands that her words reached him. Finally, she asked him what he remembered of peace. The silence that followed was heavy. For a long moment, he did not move. At last his voice came, low and steady. He said he remembered faces, not places. Faces of men who had stood beside him, faces that no longer lived to see the sun. That was his memory of peace, and it was the reason he could not put down the weight he carried. The queen's heart ached at his words. She saw the pain behind his silence, and for the first time she realized the armor was not only steel, but a wall against sorrow. She told him that the kingdom was not built on walls alone, but on trust. She said trust could not grow if he remained hidden. Daniel gave no answer. His eyes, hidden beneath his helm, betrayed nothing. But his hands clenched at his sides as though her words struck something deep. It was in the days that followed their paths crossed again and again. Eleanor would walk the training grounds, and Daniel was always there, drilling the men, his voice commanding and clear. At night she found herself searching the campfires for him, always apart, always silent. She began to see the rhythm of his life, and in that rhythm she sensed loneliness. She wondered if he even remembered how to live as more than a soldier. One night, when the sound of distant drums warned of another attack, Eleanor called Daniel to her chamber. The city prepared for defense, and panic rippled through the streets, but she wanted him near. She told him she feared the kingdom would not survive without his strength. Daniel replied with simple words, said the kingdom would survive as long as the people stood together. He said his life was only one among many, and it was his duty to give it if needed. The queen stepped closer, her eyes fixed on his hidden face. She asked him if he had ever wished for something beyond duty. Daniel stood silent, as if the question itself was heavier than any armor. At last he said that duty was the only thing left to him. Without it, he would be nothing. The words struck Eleanor deeply. She felt sorrow for him, sorrow for the man who believed his worth was only in sacrifice. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that there was more to a man than the battles he fought. But before she could speak, a messenger rushed in with news of enemy forces near the river. Daniel bowed and left at once, his armor clanging with each step, his silence louder than any cry. As the queen watched him go, she felt a storm rise inside her. She knew that Daniel was more than a soldier. She knew there was a man behind the armor, a man who had forgotten how to live. And she promised herself she would not stop until he remembered. The enemy came with fire and steel, striking at the river fortresses with sudden force. The kingdom was thrown into chaos as horns sounded across the valley. Soldiers rushed to arms, and the palace guards prepared the walls for siege. Queen Eleanor stood in the war chamber with her advisors, but her eyes searched for only one man. Daniel was already gone to the front. Leading his men with the same steady resolve he always carried, the battle raged for hours. Smoke and cries filled the air. Daniel fought at the front line, his blade cutting through enemy soldiers with unyielding strength. His armor was battered and scorched, but he did not fall. He stood like an unbreakable tower, and his men held the line because he did. The enemy pressed harder, wave after wave, but each time they met the steel wall Daniel commanded. From the palace walls, Eleanor watched the fight below. She saw Daniel move among the men, always where the danger was greatest, always shielding others before himself. She felt fear grip her heart. Fear that the man she had come to watch so closely might fall in the chaos of war. Her advisors told her to retreat to safety, but she refused. She could not turn her eyes away. When the battle finally turned, Daniel was the reason. His leadership pushed the soldiers forward until the enemy broke and scattered. The kingdom had survived another night, but it came with a heavy price. Bodies lay across the fields, and the wounded filled the courtyards. Daniel returned to the palace, his steps slow, his armor darkened with blood and ash. He said nothing as he passed the cheering men. Victory was theirs, but his silence carried the weight of loss. Later, as the palace grew quiet, Eleanor summoned him to the throne room. Torches lit the vast space, their flames casting long shadows on the walls. Daniel entered, his armor still marked from battle. She stepped down from the throne and walked toward him.
Ice.
Her voice trembled as she asked why he carried such weight alone, why he never let anyone see the man behind the steel. Daniel said nothing at first. His gauntlets clenched, his head bowed. At last his voice came rough and low. He told her he could not remove the armor, because it carried the memory of every soldier who had fallen under his watch. Each scar on the steel was a name, each mark a reminder of his failure to save them. If he removed it, he feared the weight of their memory would crush him. Eleanor felt tears burn in her eyes, but she stood firm. She told him he was wrong, that the dead did not bind him, that his scars did not make him less human. She told him the kingdom did not need only his strength. It needed his truth. Her words broke the silence, and for a moment Daniel lifted his head, as if her voice had cracked the wall he built around himself. But then he stepped back. He told her that a soldier's duty was to fight, not to share his pain. He turned as if to leave, but Eleanor reached for his arm. Her hand touched the cold steel, and she begged him not to hide forever. The air between them was heavy, filled with words unspoken. Finally, Daniel pulled free and left the chamber, his footsteps echoing against the stone. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She knew Daniel was more than his armor, more than his silence. She knew he carried wounds deeper than any sword could make. She knew she could not let him carry them alone forever. In the camp, Daniel sat alone by the dying fire. His armor lay heavy on his shoulders, the weight of memories pressing down harder than any enemy blade. He thought of the Queen's words, of her hand on his arm, of the plea in her voice. For the first time in years, he felt the wall inside him begin to tremble. The war was not finished, but something else was beginning. A battle not of steel and blood, but of heart and truth, and neither the Queen nor the soldier could turn away from it. The days after the battle were quiet, but the silence carried both relief and grief. The people repaired the streets, families buried their loved ones, and the palace returned to a fragile calm. Queen Eleanor walked often through the gardens, her thoughts heavy with the image of Daniel. She remembered his words in the throne room, the pain he carried, the wall of armor he refused to lower. She felt her heart pulled toward him, not as a queen to her soldier, but as one soul reaching for another. Daniel remained with the men, leading the rebuilding efforts. He worked without rest, carrying stones, lifting timbers, and guiding the weary with the same discipline he carried on the battlefield. Yet he still kept apart. Even in moments of peace, he sat alone by the fire, his armor never removed. The soldiers respected him, but they did not know him. To them, he was their captain, a figure of strength, not a man of flesh and feeling. One evening, Eleanor left the palace without her guards. She walked to the camp, where the men rested. The fires glowed against the dark, and the smell of smoke hung in the air. She found Daniel at the edge of the camp, his back to the flames, his eyes on the stars. He rose quickly when he saw her, bowing his head, but she raised her hand and asked him to stay seated. She sat across from him, the firelight between them. For a long time they said nothing. The only sound was the crackle of the wood. At last Eleanor spoke. She told him she did not come as a queen, but as a woman who wished to understand. She said the kingdom could not truly heal if its bravest soldier carried wounds alone. Her words hung in the air, and Daniel did not answer at first. His hand rested on the steel of his chest plate, fingers tapping lightly as though fighting a battle inside himself. Finally, he began to speak. His voice was rough, slow, but steady. He told her of the valley years ago when he had led men into battle and watched them fall one by one. He told her how he had survived when others did not, and how he had sworn never to let his weakness be seen again. Every scar on his armor, he said, was a reminder of his failure. To remove it would be to face the faces of the men he had lost, and he did not believe he had the strength to do so. Eleanor listened with tears in her eyes. She told him he was wrong to think survival was weakness. She told him the men who followed him did so because he carried their memory with honor, not shame. She said the armor did not make him strong. His heart did. She asked him to let her see the man who carried so much, not just the soldier who hid behind steel. Daniel sat still, his breath heavy. The firelight flickered across his armor, and at last he began to unfasten the clasps. The sound of metal loosening filled the night. Piece by piece, he removed the weight he had carried for so long. The chest plate fell to the ground, then the gauntlets, then the helm. When the last piece was gone, he lifted his face to the Queen. His skin was marked with scars, lines of battles long past. His eyes carried shadows of pain, but also a light that had not been seen for years. Eleanor's breath caught, and tears filled her eyes. She reached across the space between them and touched his hand. For the first time, Daniel did not pull away. Eleanor began to weep, not from fear, but from sorrow, for all he had endured, and from relief that he had finally shown himself. She told him he was not alone, that he would never be alone again. Daniel lowered his head, his voice breaking as he said he had carried the armor for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. He knelt before her, not as a soldier offering duty, but as a man offering his truth. The campfire burned low, but in its light a bond was formed stronger than steel. The queen and the soldier sat together, their silence no longer heavy, but shared. The war outside would still come, but inside the walls of the kingdom, something new had begun. Crown and sword, heart and honor, bound together not by duty alone, but by trust and truth. And from that night forward, neither of them would walk in darkness again.